This is Trump saying, you've all sat there saying two-state solution like it's a Catholic catechism. For the last 4 or 5 decades, nothing's working, nothing's changing. If you want to get on to the next stage of the ceasefire, I'm going to suggest the impossible.
It would be the most expensive and open-ended foreign policy intervention from the US, certainly since Iraq, maybe since Vietnam.
The last thing you want is to these forces to be destabilising your own countries, because sure, Egypt, Saudi, Qatar may look strong, but there are dissidents within those countries.
And for Netanyahu, who is trying to get his far-right elements to accept this ceasefire, they will turn around and go, why? We don't need a ceasefire. We've got the president on side delivering exactly what we've always wanted, which is actually the United States orchestrating a mass displacement or ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at the Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester on February the 24th. And finally, the Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of these dates, and the link will be in the description below. We are so excited to see all of you there.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job.
There are 2 ways of seeing that line from Trump. He's calling it the Riviera of the Middle East. Gazans are probably hearing that as ethnic cleansing. Today we're asking what he's really on about. He's not really going to put American boots on the ground there. So what is the idea behind his Gaza plan?
And why now? Why at this critical moment when there is an embryonic ceasefire in place, saying stuff which is essentially ripping up the American foreign policy of the past 50 years? Is there a serious and smart plan in there somewhere? Or is it just another day of headlines? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And we are in day 16, I think, or day 17 of the Trump presidency. And he's already laid claim to Greenland. He's laid claim to Panama. And now Gaza as well is going to become American soil, according to him. It is kind of dizzying to try to keep pace with these announcements that he keeps making. But make no mistake, what he has said over Gaza is huge, because this is ripping up decades of US policy to announce that the two-state solution will become the US state solution, and Gaza will become the Riviera of the Middle East.
Yeah, he is repeating a proposal that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, put forward about a year ago, last March, where he was talking about Gaza being filled with waterfront properties. And it is the talk of real estate moguls. And so on the one hand, if you look at what Trump said last night, it was very clearly auto-cued. I don't think you should think of this as being a spur of the moment,
improvised or whatever,
mad bat improvisation. But it still doesn't mean that he is really going to put, American military boots on the ground in Gaza, or that he's really thinking, I don't think, that Palestinians will volunteer to leave, or, as some of them would call it, ethnically cleanse themselves just to make room for the Americans. That's not going to happen. I was talking to a senior diplomat last night who said they think that Trump has just gone maximalist to get Netanyahu, who was sitting beside him, whose face is an absolute picture, because he wasn't expecting that to come either, to go ahead with the full ceasefire. So this is Trump saying, nobody's shaken this up. You've all sat there saying two-state solution like it's a Catholic catechism. For the last 4 or 5 decades, nothing's working, nothing's changing. If you want to get on to the next stage of the ceasefire, I'm going to suggest the impossible. I'm going to show Netanyahu, Bibi, that I'm kind of on side, get him to get his cabinet reunited around this, and we move on. Now, that is a generous interpretation from a man who, as we know, says batshit crazy things the whole time.
But I think the problem with that is, Netanyahu, who, as Trump was sort of laying this out at that press conference, looked quite shocked.
Yeah.
He didn't look like a man who was really pleased with what he was hearing. He looked shocked as many of the reporters in the room. And then he praised Trump for his willingness to think outside of the box. It's clear, quite frankly, from what Trump is saying, that he's not even clear where the box is, or he's absolutely nowhere, not even in the same solar system as the box. And the problem is with the idea that maybe this helps the ceasefire or helps Netanyahu, is that actually you can make a very different spin on it, which actually it could imperil the ceasefire. Because what is this doing? Who are the people who are really thrilled with this? It is the extreme, far-right, radical elements of Netanyahu's cabinet.
Yeah,
for whom-
and Hamas, actually, who are thrilled to hear somebody spelling out exactly what they always feared.
Well, this is exactly. This is like a fever dream for those highly nationalist elements.
Yeah.
This has been something in Netanyahu's cabinet. This is something that they have not barely dared hope for, or even
Or say out
articulate.
loud.
Or say out loud, right? The idea of actually having that greater Israel, of forcing Gazans out the Gaza Strip and out Palestinians out of the West Bank as well. And what has Trump done? Not only is this now being said aloud, but it is coming with the seal of the President of the United States as the imprimatur on it. It legitimizes that strain of thought. And for Netanyahu, who is trying to get his far-right elements to accept this ceasefire, they will turn around and go, why? We don't need a ceasefire. We've got the President on side delivering exactly what we've always wanted, which is actually the United States orchestrating a mass displacement or ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
I don't think they were envisaging America actually taking over
No.
Gaza for the waterfront
Well-
property. But I think what he's doing is signalling to Netanyahu, frankly, that he's on side. So I think the right of Netanyahu's cabinet would not be averse to hearing this. It's exactly what they want to hear.
Honestly, I'm not sure it was as well worked out as that. I think that, look, you're absolutely right to point out that there was nothing spur of the moment about this, that this was written down.
Yeah.
Had it been talked through? Had he been in touch with the Saudi
Allies?
Arabians? Had he been in touch with the Egyptians, Jordanians?
They've all rejected it, by the way.
Of course they have.
And he knows they will. And he knows they will.
And so therefore, it's sort of dead on arrival the moment it leaves his mouth as an idea. But that's not what Donald Trump's about, is it? Donald Trump is there saying, I'm going to shake everything up because I can. And he does say things out loud, even though he is the President of the United States and you're meant to take his words with some degree of solemnity. You know, this was just today's idea. Today's idea, Gaza. Tomorrow's idea, who knows where we'll go to next. And, you know, to the question that was asked in the news conference, so who's going to live there? Who's going to be in Gaza? He kind of seemed a little unclear.
Just to follow up on what you were saying about the Gazans leaving Gaza, going to other countries. One, where exactly are you suggesting that they should go? And two, are you saying they should return after it's rebuilt? And if not, who do you envision living there?
I envision world people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. But
World people. Are you a world people?
I'm a world person.
He's the ultimate world person.
I think what world person means is anyone rich enough to buy my waterfront real estate. Okay, so I was talking to this pretty senior diplomat last night who said the idea of this is that he's trying to get the Arab states to think big with him. That if you look at the Saudis, right, the Saudi leader, Mohammed bin Salman, will not take refugees. He would hate that. This person said he'd personally throttle every Hamas supporter, if he could, in the sense that they think of anything that is extreme terror as being the ultimate threat to their own regimes, their ultimate threat to their own livelihood. But if you make Saudi scared enough of this, if you make Jordan scared enough of this, if you get Qatar, raising its eyes, kind of going anything but that, right? They don't want to take in refugees. The Arab states are not really friends of the Palestinian people en masse.
They weren't taking them when they were getting bombed to bits.
Exactly.
Let alone now.
So they're not going to start now. But if you threaten them, Trump's thinking, this is in the view of the diplomat, you make them look for alternative ways of settling a story that hasn't been settled.
The thing is, though, is that if it's an attempt to kind of try and sort of shake it up and sort of exert leverage, I mean, how seriously are these states going to take it? Because if Trump is serious, right, about actually not just actually having this done in his name, but the United States do it itself, it would be the most expensive and open-ended foreign policy intervention from the US, certainly since Iraq, maybe since Vietnam. I mean, you would be talking about, tens of thousands, if not more, of American troops on the ground, operating with no international authority or legitimacy whatsoever, because it would clearly be illegal. It clearly wouldn't be sanctioned by the United Nations. And it reminded me, just watching the whole thing, whether he's serious about it or not, something we've talked about on this show quite a bit over the last two weeks since he resumed office, the difference in Trump 2 versus Trump 1. I mean, let's not forget, Trump 1 runs as the anti-war, anti-foreign entanglement, especially in the Middle East, candidate, right? This time we've got Donald Trump, just like last couple of weeks, Panama, Greenland, economic protectionism against allies, and now apparently seriously floating the idea of getting involved in the Middle East. This is a Trump. It is not isolationist, as we've said on this show. He is expansionist.
I remember when Trump made the speech at West Point in his first term as president, making the case against the forever wars that America has been involved in. And he was making the argument that we mustn't be in countries far away from home where our people know little and do not understand why we are there. The idea that tens of thousands of American troops are going to police the 1.8 million Gazans who don't want to leave and are being forced out so that he can clear the site, as he calls it, because let's face it, he's a real estate man and he just looks at Gaza as a bit of a destruction site at the moment and a demolition site and needs to be razed to the ground before you can rebuild the waterfront properties. It's not going to happen. And just the one other point that you alluded to, Emily, a moment ago, which is about the other Middle Eastern countries. I mean, Egypt has had a problem with the Muslim Brotherhood. It doesn't want to see a return to that by having militant Palestinians coming across the border who feel they've been shoved out of their own land. In Saudi Arabia, there has been a problem with militant Wahhabism. That is the last thing that Mohammed bin Salman wants. The last thing you want is to these forces to be destabilising your own countries. Because sure, Egypt, Saudi, Qatar may look strong, but there are dissidents within those countries who would be emboldened, and it would be a huge victory for Iran again, which has had a terrible 6 months.
Can I posit one other theory, which is that all this is just a distraction? That back at home, as we talked about yesterday, Trump is firing people in the FBI. He's firing people in the Department of Justice. He's letting Elon Musk take over the Treasury. There are terrible, invasive practices going on at home. And this is all just meant to say, oh, look over here. Don't worry about what's happening here.
No, I think the two things can happen simultaneously in Trump's America right now.
Yeah, but look what we're talking about today. But we're talking about this and it's never going to happen.
Yes, but you could not talk about it when the President of the United States says the two-state solution is over and rewrites American foreign policy.
But also, whether it happens or not, as you said, there are practical effects in terms of how it changes the calculus of the ceasefire. It probably emboldens Hamas as well, because they can say, we're the last defence between you and ethnic cleansing. And also, just in terms of the wider, what's happening more widely in international affairs, right? Everything Trump is doing, the way he's acting right now, the things he says can only continue to embolden other expansionist powers like China and Russia and others, because everything Trump says basically is exactly how they view the world. And might is right. If you want it, take it. Ditto Taiwan, ditto Crimea, etc., etc.
And every time he says that, we turn round to politicians who do follow the world order and say, what are you going to do about it? And they cower. They run for cover.
Well, we're joined in the studio now by Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon. And we had you in the studio when, after October the 7th, and you had family members who were stuck in Gaza. And then we spoke to you again when family members got out of Gaza. We have to talk to you again today in light of what Donald Trump has said overnight about the US taking over Gaza and the resettlement of Gazans to, well, we don't know where exactly. What was your reaction when you heard it?
I saw it last night, and actually my very first reaction was, oh God, what the hell has he said? And then I thought, do you know what? I'm going to try and go to sleep and see if it's still the same in the morning. Because sometimes he does make these comments, right? He sort of, and it did seem to be sort of midstream of consciousness, and, he's going to, the Gaza and Riviera and whatever. And then I woke up this morning and it was still there. And more besides. I think beyond just what he said about Gaza, and he loves it, it's a great place. Palestinians like it too. But, notwithstanding his wanting to build a golf course there, he also went on to say that their position on sovereignty in the West Bank is yet to be decided. And actually, of the things he said in the last 24 hours, that to me is the most troubling thing. Because sovereignty in the West Bank is not to be decided. The West Bank and Gaza are occupied Palestinian territories. They belong to Palestine as part of one day a two-state solution. And that is the American president basically giving up on a two-state solution. That's huge. That's enormous. And that has real consequences for anyone who cares about Palestine, let alone the Palestinians themselves.
If you want to be generous, Layla, you'd say he's already given up on a two-state solution. And frankly, there has been no movement on a two-state solution for decades. So he's pointing out the bleeding obvious in the hope, presumably, of getting something to happen, something to change.
It's interesting you say that. So I was talking to some of my Palestinian friends, as you would, this morning, who said the same thing. If many Palestinians for a long time have said, well, the international community will often talk about a two-state solution. I think when I spoke to you, John, we'd spoken about it, and you pointed out, why do you keep trying to talk about this? This isn't going to happen. To which the response is always, well, what's the alternative? And Trump today or yesterday has presented the alternative. It's ethnic cleansing and it's forcible transfer. And actually, it's the first time anyone said the quiet bit out loud. Because if you don't believe in a two-state solution, then that is what you're talking about. You're talking about war crimes, and you're talking about something that's fully against international law. And that's the direction of travel that he wants to take. Now, the question is, what does the international community do? And what my friend said, well, is if this is what it's going to take for Jordan, for Egypt, for Saudi Arabia to stop burying their heads in the sand over this, to stop being just about rhetoric and now start being about action, which is what many of us have been calling for a very long time, then that's a positive.
So you think that something good could come out of this, even though you may think that what Donald Trump has said is batshit crazy and an infringement of international law. But the fact of the matter is, because he said it, the other countries might start thinking, OK, well, we do have to talk seriously about what a two-state solution could look like.
Well, I mean, I didn't think that. My friend did. But it did get me thinking. And, who knows?
He's not really going to put boots on the ground. He's not, presumably, he's not going to get American soldiers to enforce what happens in Gaza. So I know this is generous, and I keep on saying, this doesn't always align with what we see from Trump, but presumably, if the Saudis really don't like this idea, if the Qataris really don't like this idea, the Jordanians really don't like this idea, and they do not want to house Palestinians in their own country, then don't they come to the table to sort it out?
And more than that, we've got countries that have the Abraham Accords with Israel set up. This was the part of the deal of the century that Trump himself negotiated. Those are still on the table. And what above our own country? There was an opportunity today. Ed Davey asked Keir Starmer during PMQs, will he now recognise the state of Palestine? Nothing. So if people are about a two-state
what Keir Starmer
solution,
said was, we will make sure that the people of Palestine get home to Gaza.
But what does that mean? We've been asking for recognition for so long. That is a first step. They keep saying when it's most likely to achieve peace. Well, actually, that's gone. It's not about that anymore. It's now about how do we even ensure the existence of the country in the first place when you've got an American president basically saying that if he's not going to take over Gaza, then he'll probably just give it to Netanyahu, because that's what he's considering doing with the West Bank. So this is now the time to act. And my call to anyone who cares, including our own government, is if you care about a two-state solution, if you believe, for the sake of Israeli and Palestinian security, that you need two states, then if you are silent, you are complicit. Now is the time to do something, not just say you're going to do something mañana.
But do you think that there is anything in this that is a workable idea? I mean, look, we have seen the outflow of people from Syria. Millions of people have left Syria since the civil war, and they have resettled in Turkey, or a lot have gone to Germany or whatever else. That actually Gaza is going to be a hellhole. The two countries living side by side is almost impossible to imagine post October the 7th. There is a real you know, the way Trump has phrased it about the riviera of the Middle East and all the rest of it, yeah, kind of ridiculous. But is there a germ of an idea there?
I don't. But which people is it that gets the land, right? And so what you're conceding there is that, yeah, the Palestinians go, and I just don't think that's acceptable. It's certainly not acceptable to my friends and family who are there, who say we will die with the land. So how are you going to get them off it then? And what does that mean? And this is why it really, really matters. And so I'm also concerned for what this is going to do to the street. We've seen over the last 18 months, however long this has been going on now, we thought there was a pause with the ceasefire, but clearly not, how it's affected relations in our country and across the world. By the way, I really feel for those hostage families. Does this make it more or less likely that those people are going to come home now? I think it's less.
Do you? You think it will?
I do. And
it
you
will
saw how
upend the
Hamas,
ceasefire.
You saw how Hamas reacted to this over the last 24 hours. This is fueling their fire. And they said, no, we absolutely cannot stand for this. I really hope I'm wrong. I genuinely hope I'm wrong, because we need to see ceasefire. And I want those hostages home as much as I want every Palestinian life alive too. But we have to understand there are immediate term consequences to this, and longer term consequences, and all are linked together.
Layla, I suppose my question would be, what does the British government do? Because it seems at the moment the British government wants to just kind of give Donald Trump flattery wherever possible, in the hope that he doesn't really notice Britain that much, and we get away from any kind of trade tariffs or anything like that. And so you don't say anything to upset. But what should the British government say?
The British government, in our history, our proud history, helped to set up the international rules-based order. What he is doing is an anathema to that. It is the exact opposite of what we claim to hold as British values at home and abroad. And I would argue that when you are faced with someone like Donald Trump, a bully, he knows who he is. Let's show him who we are. When you've got such clear statements of breaking of international law, there has to be consequences. Where are the consequences for Trump? And we all assume that if you have consequences, that's going to lead to bad things. Actually, look, he likes the strong men of the world who completely disagree with him on most of what he believes in, but he likes them because at least they know who they are. I don't think he's going to like us very much if we're the cowering kid in the back of the class. Actually, we need to stand up tall. And this is an opportunity. So you know, in the very immediate term, we need to recognise the state of Palestine just as an intent. We need to be calling for an UN Security Council meeting today.
I mean, do you want somebody from the UK government to say that idea is preposterous and it's ethnic cleansing?
It needs, yes. I want to play back to him what he actually said, and then say and condemn it. It's the very least that we should be able to do at this point. And if they do less than that, they need to understand, in my view, that they are complicit to what is coming next.
Layla, can I ask you, you're speaking as a British politician, but obviously this is very personal for you, for all the reasons that we discussed last time around. You talked about your family, after a horrendous journey, managing to get out of Gaza, going to Bahrain. And when I asked you just now if they would return to Gaza, you said no. Once they're out, they won't. So I guess if I reframe that question, in a way, your family, those family members have already decided they're not going to go back to Gaza. I mean, isn't that how it happens?
Well, when we spoke about it, Winnie, who we were talking about, is in her late 70s and appreciates that in her lifetime it's not going to happen.
She will never go back.
We met and it was very emotional, and I was like, well, what's your plan? Are you here for just a few years? Are you planning to go back? She's like, it's not going to be.
So she's gone to Bahrain.
She's gone
Others
to Bahrain.
have gone to Australia. I mean, isn't that what's going to happen now?
But I
Everyone
think it's
who leaves
worth
Gaza.
Saying, well, yes. So successive generations of Palestinians. This is our story. You know, it kind of started with the Nakba. And this is very much what's out there. This is the war and beyond, but especially this is Nakba 2.0. It's happening again, and that's when we've had displacements at speed. But actually, it's been many decades of successive displacements. But what I will say is, even though I'm only half Palestinian, there is a part of me that will always feel Palestinian, and I'd love to go back. I would love to go back, and I'm a proud East Jerusalemite, and I believe that there is a part of my soul that also belongs there. And when I go there, I feel at home. So I think we want that two-state solution because we believe in that Palestinian identity. We believe in
two-state
self-determination.
means East Jerusalem, means the West Bank and Gaza.
Yes.
With the same government? Or?
67 borders with a democratically elected Palestinian government in which extremism plays no part, which is not armed, but where Palestinians can determine their own destiny and aren't at the behest of an Israeli government that sees them as a security threat. And this is an achievable thing. This still is achievable. But my urge to everyone who cares, and I know there are many of your listeners who care, there are many people in this country who care, but a government who professes to care, is that if that is the future you want, we now have to fight for it.
Are you hearing that from anyone?
Not yet.
So Keir Starmer, it is reported, is planning to push ahead with his Chagos Islands deal. It is a deal to essentially give back sovereignty, cede sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius. And this would be despite concerns from what appears to be the new Trump administration and despite concerns, or should I say adversity, from the politicians on the opposite side of the bench. This was Kemi Badenoch, who kicked off PMQs today with her question on the Chagos deal.
When Labour negotiates, our country loses. Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties. Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, we all lose. Sometimes they don't even bother. Why did the Energy Secretary withdraw government lawyers from defending the case against the eco-nutters who want to obstruct Rosebank's oil and gas fields?
Mr. Speaker, let me deal with the serious issue she raises in relation to the Chagos case. This is a military base that is vital to our national security and to national security. A number of years ago, the legal certainty of that base was thrown into doubt. And let me, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, and I'll pick my words carefully. Without legal certainty, the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should. That is bad for our national security, and it's a gift to our adversaries. Now, some within the party opposite know exactly what I'm talking about. That is why, Mr. Speaker, that is why the last government started negotiations about sovereignty and about securing the long-term use of the base. Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That's why the last government conducted 11 of the 13 rounds of those negotiations. And, Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That is why this government has completed that process, and we were right to do so. Mr. Speaker, I will set out the details when they're finalised, and it will, of course, be presented to Parliament. But if the Leader of the Opposition is properly briefed on the national security implications when she's asking these questions, which she's perfectly entitled to do, then she knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of national security and legal certainty. If, on the other hand, she's not properly briefed on the national security implications, she's not doing her job, she's not concerned about national security, and she's not fit to be Prime Minister.
So that was Keir Starmer deflecting it away quite effectively, Badenoch's question. Although Badenoch at PMQs, I mean, she can never fail to see a kind of absolute open goal and then seems always to
hit the ball over the bar.
Yeah, because, I mean, she identified at the very beginning the actual crux, the actual really politically difficult part of this story, which was the Times reporting yesterday, which was that potentially we might be giving 18 billion, which is double the amount that was previously reported. She could have just said, is that true? And he would have either had to deny it or evade around it. Instead, what he did, which was intriguing, was sort of hint that there may be something that he knows and that she ought to know that would mean that this deal has to be done. But I have to say, I mean, I think that Labour MPs who are skittish about this are right to be so. The Tory party is going on it much more effectively, largely prosecuted by people like Robert Jenrick, and because it is a difficult thing to sell, particularly if you're in a constituency, a northern constituency or Midlands constituency. You've got maybe reform breathing down your necks. Whatever the reason might be that he's hinting at there that he can't tell us, the idea of paying the Mauritians a huge amount of money to take territory which right now is ours, well, good luck with that.
I thought that Kemi Badenoch came across as looking for a soundbite and was absolutely slapped around the head by detail. Well, let's listen to how Keir Starmer came back at Kemi Badenoch, who seemed to fold on her charges about the Chagos Islands.
Mr. Speaker, when she became leader of the opposition, I said to her that I would give her a briefing on any national security issue if she asked for it. That's very important to the way that we run our democracy. She has not asked for a briefing.
And I thought it made Kemi Badenoch look like she really hadn't sort of prepared properly or wasn't being serious and grown up about this, when, you know, it does look like it was the Tory government who did most of these meetings and set most of this in train, and it's Keir Starmer who has finished it off since he became Prime Minister.
Yeah, but it's being authorised and done by this government, right? And as I say, I think the politics of it is pretty potentially noxious. I mean, Chagos, obviously, most people have never ever heard of, have no familiarity with whatsoever, have no interest really in the kind of geopolitical strategic importance of it. But you can absolutely imagine Reform in particular and others, and as I say, this is why Labour MPs are worried, weaponising this in a highly effective way, because it is basically us paying the Mauritians to take our territory. Now, there may be lots of good reasons for that, but politically, it is less than ideal.
I think that's where he went wrong. I think if he had said much more clearly, this is a threat, a security threat from China, or spelled out whatever he's actually talking about, it would have hit home. What he did tap into is something that I have been hearing from senior Conservatives reflecting on how Kemi Badenoch does business at the moment, which is she's quite scatty. She's quite underprepared. She goes to meetings without actually having done her homework, without actually having done the stuff that she needs to get to the detail. She's not, bizarrely, a details person. She's somebody who, you know, is bull in a china shop. She's got a great bark and a great bite, but she doesn't actually do the preparation. And I think Keir Starmer started to make that case there by saying she'd been offered the security briefing, she hadn't accepted them. If he had spelled out why we need to do this deal, just give it us in one sentence, I think you bring a lot of people on side. If you said this is a national security threat from China, I think people would get it much more clearly.
When you're being outflanked by the Lib Dems on security, as Ed Davey was doing when I was filling in for James O'Brien on RBC today, he said, I asked him about it, he was talking about Gaza, I asked him a last question about it, and he said that the Chagos deal is a shambles, that Mauritius is calling all the shots, and the deal should be reviewed. As I say, when the Lib Dems are outflanking you on security, strategic matters, it's probably a sign that not all is well.
So why is he pushing ahead with it then?
Yeah, so what's going to happen? And also, what happens when Jonathan Powell, who's the National Security Advisor, who was Tony Blair's Chief of Staff back in the day.
I mean, because Ed Davey won't know, presumably, the security breach that he's talking about, or the security implications.
Well, no, Ed Davey would. Ed Davey would have been
yeah.
a Privy Councillor and leader of one of the main political parties. He would have been briefed in the same way that the leader of the opposition
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? That's a big divide between the Labour leader and the Lib Dem leader on something that you would have thought they probably shared ground on, which is foreign policy most of the time.
It goes to your point, Emily. I think it's a good example of where the government is failing to communicate what it's doing and why. And there's a result that you just end up in this kind of long period of abeyance and vacuum, which is filled by actually some pretty noxious comments. I mean, you know, as I say, I think it's really quite bad politics. I'm also not sure about the strategy of doing it, again, because they haven't sort of explained it especially effectively. But like some of the things that some Conservative politicians in particular are saying, I mean, Robert Jenrick has accused Keir Starmer of being a traitor, of having traitorous behaviour. He's called him a quisling, a reference to the Norwegian collaborator in the Second World War with the Nazis. This is extremely, extremely emotive.
But isn't that funny that Keir Starmer is saying, I'm going to choose my words carefully? I mean, there you've got, in a nutshell, the difference between the parties. Jenrick and Badenoch go straight for, 10 sort of thing. And Starmer's going, well, I'm going to choose my words very carefully.
Let's hear from Jenrick exactly in this vein what he's been talking about.
This is such a bad deal that defies all logic and common sense that I think it is nothing short of traitorous.
And I think it's really, really disturbing language. I mean, we do not. It's so funny. It's so ridiculous, isn't it? In Westminster, we go through the whole rigmarole all the time of whenever there are threats against MPs and threats of violence or actual violence against MPs, and we go through the whole tedious conversation of we need to be really careful with our language, and then invoking that sort of stab in the back, that kind of betrayal narrative is just not helpful to anyone. And we might think this could be a bad deal, and you could say it's a bad deal and he shouldn't be signing it. You don't have to suggest that someone is a traitor to their country for signing it.
It's absurd, and it is that kind of area of social media where unless I speak at volume 12, I'm not going to be heard. So you have to
Unless
go
I have
to the
Patriot in my bio.
I want to be leader. I want to be leader.
So you just go nuclear on everything, and reason goes out the window. It's a real kind of debasement of political currency, isn't it? That's what you go to first to make a kind of. If you want to say that deal is a bad deal and should be renegotiated, fine. It doesn't make Keir Starmer an unpatriotic quisling of whoever.
We'll be back after the break.
Before we go, we started the episode with Donald Trump opining on Gaza at his White House news conference. He was also asked in that news conference by an Afghan journalist about the situation in Afghanistan. He had rather less to say about the future of Afghanistan. This is what he did have to say, though.
Do you have any plan to change Afghanistan situation? Are you able to recognize Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist, Afghan suffered woman. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your future plan for Afghan people, especially Afghanistan?
I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? Oh. Actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck, live in peace. Go ahead.
She starts smiling. She thinks he's going to pay her a compliment. And she puts her thumb up as if to say, great, yes. And then she suddenly realises that he's going nowhere. And it's the equivalent of him saying, it's just noise. You're a foreigner. Let's move on.
Good luck and live in peace. Maybe that's what we should say.
That's our sign off every day.
Sign off every day.
Yeah, let's do it.
From Emily, Lewis and John, good luck and live in peace. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.